Today we're discussing Unit 2, Classical Era, that's 500 BCE to 500 CE. Very important to keep the dates in mind here. For example, Islam, not developed yet. And this is a period of empire, social inequality, and of course an unprecedented level of cultural traditions that develop, including religion. So this discussion will focus on the idea that religion is a double-edged sword. You may believe that or not believe that, but the question, the big picture question number 3 for this chapter is, how would you support both sides of the statement? So you're going to need to try to look at it from both sides. So first part here, it says religion is a double-edged sword, both supporting and undermining political authority and social elites. So in looking at the chapter in this unit and what we're discussing, you have to consider, is legalism and is Confucianism among the ideas that you should be maybe answering here? And it's probably not, because they're not religions really. They're philosophies or ways of living. But these can both support and threaten political authorities and social elites. And a good example of this is with Confucianism. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, felt like that was a threat to him because it held the emperor and government officials to such a high regard that he wasn't free to do the crazy things that he wanted to do, which was rule with a pretty iron fist. So he institutes legalism. We also know the story of Socrates and his death, which he was charged with corrupting the youth of Athens. And you see the famous picture there depicting him drinking the hemlock cup, from the hemlock cup, this poison, because he was found guilty of corrupting the youth. And that's because he was undermining political authority and potentially the social elites of Athens. So let's look a little bit deeper here at Confucianism. According to the Chinese tradition, and it's an early Chinese tradition, we kind of discussed this in an earlier video, but this idea of filial piety, the primary duty of all Chinese persons was, as Confucius said, it's the root of all virtue, of all the actions of man. There are none greater than those of filial piety. So what is it? It is extreme respect to Chinese parents, and shown by their children. This is something your parents kind of agree with, and they want to see extreme respect. There's 3 main relationships. The book mentions 5, and you can paint a different picture here, but looking at it from a family perspective, of course, the parents, especially the father, would be worshipped in a way, or listened to, regarded as his word is gold. The brothers, especially the male heir to the family name, and then you can extend that all the way up to the emperor, meaning really any government official is someone you should listen to without question. And practicing these ideals was an important part of Chinese culture and something that Confucius believed in very strongly. Therefore, you'd expect that filial piety would be incorporated into all the major religions of China as it has been. Legalism was one way that it was not. And in legalism, the first emperor tried to rid China of these Confucianist ideas, burned books, buried people alive who kept those books, but yet they could not stop Confucianism. And today, it's still a major part of what it means to be a Chinese person. Filial piety also extends to the emperor and any servants of the Chinese state. So, looking here at Athens, we'll switch gears back and forth to some of these. There you see the painting by Raphael called The School of Athens, and it depicts a number of people from this point in history, and some maybe even a little further into history. The numbers here represent who the people in the painting probably are or might be, but notice how many are kind of questioned there or not sure about them. Like number 14 right in the center, and you see him down here at the bottom. Is that Leonardo da Vinci, or is that Plato? hard to tell. Some of them seem to be pretty easy to explain, but some aren't as easy. Like number 7, it could be Alcibiades, or he's a famous Greek philosopher and friend of Socrates, or he could be Alexander the Great, which easily could be if you look at what he's wearing with the armor. Regardless, that painting kind of showcases and depicts this idea of learning being very important in the Athenian world. It probably doesn't pick up a strong head of steam until after the death of Socrates. These philosophers start to consider what his wisdom was, and that was, you should question those around you and those in power. And is that what it means to be a good citizen of Athens? Somebody who is constantly checking and being certain that what laws are being put into place are actually those that should be there, and do they represent the best needs of the people? So the painting depicts Crito and Plato, the former sitting ruefully at the edge of the bed, and the latter clutching the knee of Socrates. So you get this sense, especially of Plato here, and Plato and Crito sitting there, sensing the dread in their faces that this great leader of theirs, a great friend of theirs, someone who they believe in very strongly, is being put to death. Now, Socrates could have easily left Greece, and especially Athens, and survived, and he would have lived. He had the option to either drink from the hemlock cup and basically kill himself by doing so, or leave. And he felt so strongly about his beliefs and his stance about his lack of being wrong in this situation. He felt like he was right, that he basically makes this statement. And I think you could say that if he didn't make that statement, if he didn't go through with this, would we even consider him as being such a great leader? And would he have been as impactful on those that followed him, like Plato, Aristotle, and then later Alexander the Great? I think you could make a case that it's in this final action of his life that he cements the things that he believed in so strongly. Pretty difficult to do, though, and very hard, I would think, for most people to do that. At the bottom right corner is a picture, kind of a painting, a depiction of someone else who decided to not run or not say that, hey, I'm wrong, even though they may not feel like it. She could have gotten away. And of course, that's the famous, anybody remember from class? Anybody remember? We'll get there in just a minute. I'm going to see if you can think about it and remember exactly what happened to her and where she is and why she's being struck down by a gladiator. But before we get there, let's look at a few things here. Religion's a double-edged sword. What is a double-edged sword anyway? Is it a sword that has two edges to it and a point at the end? And sure, every sword probably has a double edge. If it doesn't have the two sides of that edge, it'd kind of be just a knife. But as some of you may have mentioned in class already, if you don't have a handle on that sword and both ends are pointed, that's probably what they're getting to here. This idea of it can strike both ways. It can support and undermine. Students could readily point in answering this question or supporting political and social authority that there are individual instances where new and popular religions were adopted by elites. And in that way, would that support their political authority? It could. Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism in Mauryan, India, provides a really good example of this. The Mauryan Empire that he led, he leads his armies and slaughters his enemies, and on the battlefield, and this is the interesting thing, that Ashoka means without sorrow. Yet he experiences great sorrow on the battlefield after this happens, and tears stream from his eyes, and he realizes, what have I done? He later converts to Buddhism, a very peaceful religion, And the pillars you see on the left there on the screen of the lion at the top kind of leave inscriptions of what he did and how he believed people should be. He sent Buddhist priests and monks out throughout Asia, spreading the word of this new faith. Another way to look at religion supporting a political authority is the Achaemenid dynasty and this religion that they had called Zoroastrianism. It wasn't an official religion per se of the Persian Empire. They were open to religious ideals of others, but it was supported. So finally, you could look at the adoption of Christianity by Constantine, the emperor, or one of the emperors of Rome, who decides, almost like on the battlefield itself, or right before the battle begins, to take up the sign of Christ as they enter the battlefield. And they are underdogs. They shouldn't win the battle that they're going to fight against Maxentius, but they do. And he then ultimately, as he takes the throne, converts to Christianity. And his idea of one emperor that the people could come to love and follow and worship in a way kind of mirrors that of Christianity, the one true God, one true emperor. And you have to remember, with Constantine, he was living in a time period where the Roman Empire had gotten so big that they were dividing it up amongst different emperors. What ends up happening with Constantine is he takes sole control of the eastern part of the Roman Empire, and as the West is falling, and it is falling into decay, and it's slowly deteriorating from within and from without, as we'll talk about, he sets up a major, strong city called Constantinople, which takes the place of the city called Byzantium. And this becomes an empire of sorts. Some people consider that to be the continuation of the Roman Empire. Some believe it to be a new Eastern Roman Empire. Later, when Constantinople falls, the religion of Christianity kind of spreads north to Russia, and the Russian Orthodox Church takes the place of the Eastern Orthodox Church. There's more about this coming down the road, but it's good to be considering it and thinking of it now, because when we get there, it's going to be a lot to swallow when we see the split of Christianity and this idea of new Rome's developing. There's the original Rome, there's Constantinople, and then there's this Russian city that takes its place. So here's our friend from the battlefield, and you may remember this image from the video we will watch or did watch in class. Did the execution of Perpetua, this Christian woman who is kind of captured and then taken to the gladiator arena to be killed. And this is the old idea of the Christians and the gladiators, or the Christians and the lions fighting in front of the Roman people for entertainment. She takes the sword and then places it to her throat after she's stabbed in the stomach, according to witnesses who saw this. And did her execution and her actions, you could look at it that way as well, ultimately support Rome or undermine Rome, the political authority, the social elites? I think you could paint this in a couple different directions, couldn't you? You could say, for example, like with Constantine here, that he ends up benefiting in some way from this idea of one true Christian God. But initially, certainly initially, this is undermining the political authority of the Roman government, because what it's doing is saying, the people who witness this are saying, look at the martyrdom that this person, as Paul had done as well, look at this person who's giving up their life for their belief. And as Socrates had done in Greece, this is a strong statement. Now, you could make the same case that today, that we just looked at this fall, the anniversary of 9/11, and we looked at all the flags out front of our school, and what a tremendous display that was. I mean, it's really something that brings you close to feeling like some of us did on 9/11, and we felt such terror and emotion about the acts of these people who hijacked planes and flew them into buildings or into the Pentagon or into the or brought down in the field in Pennsylvania. But could you even say, and this is a stretch, admittedly, that those terrorists were doing something similar in a way? They're giving up their lives because of their beliefs. I think you could say that, but you also have to keep in mind that Perpetua's death and Socrates' death does nothing to harm other people. If the only thing it's doing is opening up the minds of those who are watching or understand their actions and why they did that, to make such a strong statement with giving their lives. The terrorists on 9/11 caused the deaths of close to 3,000 Americans, and I'm not so sure that's just not an act of war, really. Speaking of an act of war, in hoc signo vinces, by this sign you will conquer. This is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which took place between two Roman emperors who were battling for power. And at this point in history, around 300 CE, Constantine I and Maxentius are duking it out for power in Rome. They both have armies that are supporting them. And they meet on a bridge, which you can kind of see in this picture here. And this is the battlefield as painted by artists later depicting what had happened. The story goes that Constantine sees a signal or a sign from God in the sky. It could have been a meteor, it could have been anything. It could have been a strange cloud formation. But the belief was of those around him and the many Christian soldiers who were fighting in his army that this was a sign from the one true God, that they should be fighting for him, and that he is giving them a sign that if they believe, he will protect them and they will win in battle. So Constantine is given sort of a advice from his advisors that he should paint the sign of Christ on their shields, that he should use it as their standard. The Chi-Rho is one of the earliest forms of Christogram and is used by Christians to show their faith, like the cross is today. So the Chi-Rho is this X with a P at the top. And a lot of students think, well, maybe that was the real cross that Jesus was crucified on. And that's not necessarily true. They did use different forms of crosses, but what this is standing for and what it represents is the first two capital letters, Chi and Rho, of the Greek word for Christ. X and P are the first two letters of that, and so that's why they're going to paint that on their shields and take that as their sort of their banner or their sign into battle. So you see it here depicted in the palace here at the Vatican, and that's the same image at the bottom. If we go up here a little bit more, that you can see it at the bottom of this slide. So it brings to life and kind of showcases what happened at this river, and this idea that, you know, today I think you could justifiably say that it's the actions of Constantine, and it could have been any emperor who decided to do this, because there's momentum building. Christianity was spreading, but this idea to take on Christianity as an official religion of the empire, and one that would be embraced by most Europeans and most Romans at that time. But it's Constantine who does this first, and you can see the Battle of the Milvian Bridge here in your notes. You can click on it and let it play. But it depicts it. I don't know how accurate that is. It's more of a dramatization, because our friend Constantine wasn't the greatest Christian of all time. I mean, he had people killed. He was ruthless. He had some of his own family members killed even after he converted to Christianity. So I think at worst you could say he was not a Christian. He just said he was, and he was one in name. At best you could say that his impact here on pushing the idea of Christianity towards the Roman people and uniting them under that idea was pretty strong. And you could take it further and say he builds this new city. He rebuilds what is Byzantium, an dusty outcrop, or outpost at that point of the Roman Empire, and builds it into this great city that today is Istanbul, and is maybe that pivot point between East and West that we think of today if we're thinking of two different types of thought. But according to the chroniclers, the battle marks the beginning of his conversion to Christianity. So it certainly attributes Constantine's success. This arch does here. And this is what the soldiers would have marched through on the way home. And sometimes they have this built afterwards, and they do ceremonies for it. And other times they'll build the arch, even before the battle, and then they'll walk through it on their victory back. And we'll see more about arches in this type in France and other parts of Europe and Germany as well. But there's nothing really on this arch that depicts him as being a Christian in any way, and you would think that would be a major part of this. So there is some symbolism, but not anything that overtly showcases Christianity. So this separation between church and state, we'll look at that sometimes, and is that important? I think with the Persians, we've learned they were able to keep a rather large empire together because they had this idea of religious toleration, where you could take on the religious ideals of the people that you could keep those for yourself, even though your people were maybe conquered in battle. We have a similar philosophy in the United States today, freedom of worship and freedom of religion. We'll talk more about that when we get into the spring. But more generally here, the tendency of several religions to focus on the believer's attention away from the action of this world, sometimes that also supports political authority and social elites. You could make the case that Constantine was simply turning the people's attention away from the actions of some corrupt emperors, himself included, and doing that through the guise of Christianity. But this is true of Taoism in China, Buddhism in India, Christianity in the Roman Empire. It just depends on your perspective and how you're looking at it. So religion is a double-edged sword, both supporting and undermining political authority and social elites. If you take a stance in either direction on this, from an Eastern or Western perspective, and you see Eastern on the right side of the screen, Western on the left side of the screen. But, however, if followed, the teachings of many religions put real constraints on the political and social authorities. For example, like Ashoka's adoption of Buddhism would limit the scope of his legitimate use of violence. If he wanted to expand his territory, for instance, would he have been able to do that? No. Some point to that reason as to why India never has a massive empire that spreads out from itself. India seems to stay self-contained. But China does the same thing, and some of that is the ideas of the dictates of Confucianism, that you should improve from within, that's a personal struggle, and that you should look up to those who are Chinese in the Confucius way, and not really worry about other places and other people. And we'll see that develop into the idea of the Middle Kingdom in the next couple of chapters in the next unit. But dictates about the treatment of the poor and equality of all believers in the Christian faith brought into question the social norms of the Roman society, especially those Romans who are fighting. So you see a couple depictions of Roman soldiers at the top there. One potentially being those who fought under the Chi-Rho symbol. They're just depicting them. And on the right, a Christian who's holding up the cross. And it's easier, I think, to make a case for war when you're a Roman who worships the god of war, or Apollo, or this war, or that god of this war or that war. There were many, many pagan gods. It's kind of easier to go in that route and support a more warring and violent society. But if you read the Bible and the teachings of Jesus, who's shown below, that's a lot more difficult to do in that sense. And Buddhism certainly is a very peaceful religion. It is in its essence. So, religious leaders could prove subversive to the current system. So, the execution of Jesus shows this very well. The Roman authorities saw him as a threat, and the teachings of a faith could potentially damage their established authorities and who they are. He is claiming to be a person who understands the world in a different way than those vast majority of Romans do. They kind of appease the Jews in many ways, but this one person, Jesus, and his radical way of looking at things, and he had a pretty radical stance for his time, that's certain. So another way of looking at this is the strict monotheism practiced by early Christians effectively preclude the worship of Roman gods. Because if you're saying there's only one true God, well, there's no room for Jupiter and Juno and Mars, Venus, the Vulcan, and other gods. And you see at the bottom left corner there a depiction of a woman who is making a sacrifice to the god of war as her husband or brother or other countrymen are out fighting in battle. And in a way, that's kind of supporting the way the norm of the society was. And they did this many times in what's called the Pantheon, the building above that, depicted above that with the moon. As I've already mentioned here in this video, that's going to be a very difficult transformation for this Roman army that kept and held their vast empire by the means of a short sword, and a vast number of very armored soldiers who fought in a violent and terrifying manner. Are you going to be able to continue that when people are worshiping Christ? So you see again there the chi-rho symbol that kind of covers up and replaces those many gods, and some more about Christianity and the Emperor Constantine at the bottom. So Constantine, one god, worshipping a monotheistic religion, also equated nicely to the idea of one emperor. And if the Roman people were embracing Christianity, so would he, in an attempt to capitalize on this monotheistic trend, one true God, one true emperor for Rome. So hopefully you have a better idea of how this could be a double-edged sword in a way. And why do you think that Strayer uses the term double-edged sword? This is something I don't think we discussed in class this year as I'm recording the video, but it's a really good thing to consider. The term sword itself, teaming that with religion, is meant to focus your attention towards the fact that there's this dual perspective of peaceful religions, yet political authority and social elites who want to protect their empire or expand it through violent means. You can go in either direction, I think, on this question, but again, just like on the AP test, you're going to have to try to create a good thesis and then back that with evidence. And we're going to continue to keep working on that in class. So until next time, and there'll be another 2 or 3 more videos from this chapter number 5. And this is a big unit, 4, 5, and 6. There's a lot to chew on, so you really got to be on your game for the test for this unit. But until next time, don't forget to be awesome.